You're listening to Precinct 444, a podcast network from the National Law Enforcement Museum. Today we're bringing you an episode from Icons, where we introduce listeners to the incredible people working within law enforcement who have had a profound impact on the community.
So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to another episode under the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial and Museum banner. We have a series of podcasts, and most recently we've been thinking about and here talking about connecting with our corporate partners, those organizations and companies which have supported us. I suspect that many in our audience are already aware, but the Memorial Fund created in 1984, which started with first the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial and then subsequently the museum, which opened in 2018, has existed since its inception entirely on donations. Donations largely from those in and affiliated with law enforcement, but also from a variety of corporate partners. And so again, those organizations and companies which have supported law enforcement generally, and perhaps the Memorial Fund and Museum specifically, to help support our ongoing efforts to honor the fallen, tell the story of American law enforcement, and make it safer for those who are still doing the job today. So that is our broad mission, and a variety of companies and organizations have supported us and continue to support us over the years. And we thought that we would put together this sort of podcast series to talk to some of those corporate partners and get a sense of who are they, what is their company, why do they have an interest in us, perhaps specifically, or an interest in law enforcement generally. And so today it's my absolute pleasure to talk with my friend and colleague and peer here at the Memorial Fund, Aaron Slater, who's affectionately known as Slater to those who he knows, who is a board member here at the Memorial Fund, is a prior police officer, and is also the owner of a business which has over time and continues to support us in our mission today, and that would be ReLEntless Defender. So it's my pleasure to introduce you here today, Slater, and welcome you on to our podcast.
Well, thank you, Bill, and I appreciate being here. It's likewise, it's been a great honor to not only be a part of this organization, but more so to actually be your friend. So thank you for having me here.
Well, it's our absolute pleasure, and you are a king among men, and it's really my honor and pleasure to have come to know you and become friends with you over the last few years. Well, why don't we start a little bit? Why don't you tell the audience, who is Aaron Slater? What is your sort of backstory? I like to use the phrase your sort of superhero origin story, because I think everyone who has been and is in law enforcement is something of a superhero. What is the story of Aaron Slater, and what brought you here to, up through to today?
So it's kind of an interesting story, and it's not one that's very clean, if I could explain it to you in that manner. Kind of moved from town to town, city to city. I was born in Montana. I don't know how I ended up in Texas, but I was born in Montana, moved to Denver, Colorado, then Connecticut, and then Madrid, Spain. And then my parents divorced in Spain, and my mom brought herself and her 4 boys down to Houston, Texas. And since then, I've lived here in Houston. I will tell you that growing up in a single mother household with 4 boys, all I can say is I respect and also feel sorry for my mother, because we weren't the easiest 4 boys to grow up and try to raise. When she started over with essentially nothing, no college, no education, no work experience, and she was literally trying to raise 4 boys, working 2 jobs nonstop. And the one thing that I can say is, if anybody's ever in that circumstance, and I'm sure there's tons of people that have grown up with that circumstance, the one thing that I can tell you that I took from that was my mother's work ethic. And yes, there was times where you look back and you say, well, she wasn't there for this and she wasn't there for that. But anybody that I can give advice to, and I still do it to this day, anybody that sits there and complains about your parents not being there, if they're providing and they're doing everything they possibly can to make sure that you have a home, they were there. They were there in many, many ways. So that is the case. But it goes without saying that doesn't mean that I was a perfect child by any means. I did get in trouble when I was younger, to the point where I got in trouble with the law. And older brother had gotten in trouble as well. And that does come with the idea of absenteeism being a parent because of the work that she was always doing, trying to provide. So there was some supervision issues, and that happens a lot of times in single family households. So, anyways, when I was 16, I got in trouble with the law, and it was one of those deals where I ended up moving out when I was 16, and I've lived on my own since I was 16, essentially. And when I moved out, it was one of those deals when you're a child or a teenager, you think you're the smartest person in the entire world. You think that you know better than anybody else. And I can tell you that also in that time, I was kind of a free will, kind of a feral cat aspect. And there was one day after I had moved out that there was a knock on the door of where I was living at, and I was living with a friend and his parents. And knock on the door, and I answer the door, and sure enough, there's a cop at the door. And I had no idea why he was there. I just knew that I wasn't too fond of police officers at the time. But I knew this cop from living down the street from me. And he lived about 10 houses down. And he literally just stopped and asked me to come outside. And I go outside, arms crossed, kind of just this cocky 16-year-old. And all he said is, I know you're not living at your house, but if you need anything, call me. And I stopped for a second and I didn't understand it. And he turned to start walking away. And he turned and says, "Do you know my name?" And I just remembered his last name. I couldn't pronounce it right. But his first name was Hal and his last name was Clarida. And I said, "Officer Claire," he goes, "No, it's just Hal. Just Hal." And he goes, "But call the police department and ask for me if you need anything." Back then, we didn't have cell phones. This is in 1994. And so I said, "Okay." Well, life goes on. And I ended up dropping out of high school. Um, and I ended up having a baby at a young age. 18 is when my girlfriend got pregnant at the time. And life was just shoulder, weight, everything is piling on. And I remember one day I didn't know what to do, and it was one of those deals where we've all been through it. You just the whole world's against you, and you didn't know, how you're going to fix the world, how you're going to make your life better, and those types of things. And it got to the point where I have a girlfriend at home with a new baby, um, making very little money, just trying to struggle to make ends meet and try to live life. And I just needed somebody to talk to. And so I was driving. I said, "You know what? Why not?" So I drove down to where my mom lives, and I was thinking maybe she'd be outside checking the mail, but she wasn't. Um, and I had too much pride to go knock on the door and say, "Hey, I just need to talk to somebody." And I kept on driving down the road, and there to the left was Hal, standing outside cooking on the grill in his front porch driveway area. And I see him look over at me, and I just had this look like, "Oh, let me just keep driving," and not notice that I noticed him. And I drive around the block, and I keep driving down, and I just stopped for a second. And I said, "You know what? I have nobody else. Nobody else." So I pull in, I turn back around, I come back, and there he is, kind of standing there, and he waves for me to come up. So I park in front of his house. I get out, and I start walking up, and I sit down, and I'm just kind of sitting there, and he sits down, and he asks, "How you like your hamburgers?" I said, "Cooked." The house. So he makes hamburgers, and he sits down. Gives me a hamburger, and we just start talking. And more so, he started talking, and he probably talked for about a good 2 hours, 2.5 hours. And I just sat there and listened to him. And I didn't say much. I just maybe have said, two or three sentences. And then I just heard him talk about law enforcement and all the different things that he does in law enforcement. And it wasn't in the aspect of what you and I know, Bill, is to be war stories, because it wasn't war stories. It was more about, what he was doing for the community and how he was changing the world and his world, and what impact he was making and those types of things. And for whatever reason, um, the stories didn't intrigue me. It was more about how it made him feel intrigued me, almost like it was just this passion that he was, you know, that was fulfilling him to do these things for other people. And it just, honestly, it was very, very, very uplifting for me at that time. About 2.5 hours go by, 2.5 hours go by, and I leave, and I kind of left with a sense of a new friend, if you say, but more so, it didn't feel like a friend. It was more like a mentorship and a fatherhood aspect that he was providing. So life goes on, and continue to work and continue to do the things. Struggle didn't get any different. Um, and I would go visit him now about every 3 months, 4 months, and kind of the same type of conversation. I would open up a little bit more, and I'd start talking about some of the things. He would mentor. He'd kind of feedback, and and then one day he just asked me. He goes, "What do you want to do with your life?" And I was probably about 20 years old, and for the first time ever, when somebody asked me that, I had no idea, because I had never been asked, "What am I going to do with my life?" I was living day for day. I was just trying to make it to the end of the day and start the next day and those types of things. And I said, I don't know. I don't know. He said, "Why don't you become a cop?" And I said, "How? I can't become a cop. I got in trouble already." And he goes, "That's when you were a juvenile. That doesn't matter." And I said, "Okay." He goes, "I'm serious. Why don't you become a cop?" And I sat there and I thought about it. And while I was thinking about it, he just kind of paused me. He goes, "It seems like you're interested in it, because you talk to me all the time about it, and you ask questions." I said, "How? You don't get it. I don't think what you're saying is interesting. I like the way it makes you feel. I like the way it makes you, the energy it provides you, and those types of things. And it just seems like, you love it." And he goes, "I do. And don't you ever think that you could get the same understanding of things?" And I said, "Okay, I can see that." He says, "Well, why don't you do it?" And I said, "Well, what do I need to do?" And I started asking, how do I do it? And what do I need to do to make that happen? And he said, he explained to me, he said, "Here in Texas, for all the viewers in Texas, we go to the academy first. And then once you go to the academy, then you start applying for police jobs. And then when you get hired by the agency, then they put you through maybe their own lateral or their FTO program, of course." So he explained it to me, and I got extremely excited about it now. And so I said, "Okay." He goes, "I can take you down to the academy and sign you up," and we had to pay for it. So I said, "Okay." So next day, he literally helped me, went down with me to the academy, and um, I get all the paperwork, and I get essentially the quote to go to the academy, and it was like $2,600 back in 1996. Okay, and $2,600, it could have been $2.6 million. I didn't have a penny to my name, and
Yep.
so it was just one of those things that was just extremely out of reach for me. So from there, I said, "Okay, this is going to be tough. I need to figure this out." So I end up calling my father to see if he would pay for it, and the conversation was very short. My father, uh, God bless him, he's still my father, and I love him to death. But he's a very educated man. He master's degree in geology, worked at Exxon in the corporate aspect of things, which was while traveling the entire time. And I call him and I said, "Dad," and I ain't talked to him in a long time at this point. I said, "Dad," and there was a little bit of conversation. It was trying to catch up a little bit. And I said, "Hey, I think I know what I want to do with my life." And he goes, "Okay, what's that?" I said, I want to be a police officer. And I was calling to see if you would help me and pay for the academy. And I was paused for a second. And he says, why would you want to be a minimum wage trash man for the U.S. government? And for me, I got extremely upset about it. I got angry about it. I got um, immediately enraged about it. And it wasn't because he called cops minimum wage trash man for the U.S. government. It was more so that he called the only father mentor that I had entrusted in and made a relationship with. And I took that very personal for that understanding of things. So I just said the universal "f you" and hung up the phone. And I literally sat there and just was kind of crushed because it was one of those deals where everything that I was looking forward to, all these ideas, just stopped and ceased. And I just kind of looked at the world and I said, well, that's over with. And I just kind of went back to the grind and I avoided Hal. And for about 2 weeks, and I was driving one day, and sure enough, I see Hal, and we're passing each other, and he decides, well, I'm going to pull him over and and find out what's going on. So sure enough, he flips and lights me up and walks up to the car and says, hey, I thought we had a deal. I said, it's not going to happen. He goes, well, why not? And I said, well, the kind of explained a little bit. And I said, and he goes, hey, come to the house tonight. I want to talk to you. I said, okay. So sure enough, I he goes, I get off at 6. So I end up going over there at 6. And sure enough, he's sitting there, but this time he doesn't have a grill out. He just has 2 chairs in the front yard. And I walk up and he says, sit down. And he starts talking to me in a way that honestly, I've never seen him talk. It was very stern. It was very direct. And he goes, do you want this? I said, I do. And he goes, well, tell me what happened. And so I kind of explained to him, and I couldn't hold myself, and I would started crying, and I'd never cried in front of a man at that point, so I was embarrassed. I have my head down, and I couldn't get through the entire conversation without the emotion flowing. So he goes, okay. So he gets up, he walks inside, he stays inside for about 15 minutes, and by that time I've recouped myself and gathered my composure, and he walks back out with his wife. And she sits on his knee, and he's sitting there talking to me. And he goes, hey, we've had this discussion, and we've made the decision that we're going to pay for your academy. And at that point, I just started crying again, like out of emotion, like nobody's done that for me and that type of things. And I didn't expect it. So now I'm crying in front of a woman, and that was even more embarrassing. And she didn't say anything. She just kissed me on the forehead while I had my head down, and she said, "You know we love you." And it goes inside. And so he sat there. He sat there, and he says, "I have my head down." He goes, "Look at me." And he says it again, very stern. "Look at me." So I look up, and he says, "You want this, don't you?" I said, "Yeah, very much so." And he says, "Understand something." And he said something that resonated with me for the rest of my life, but and for anybody else, it may have just been a conversation or just a side understanding of things. He says, in life, for everything that you want, there's going to be obstacles. And with those obstacles, you need to go over them, around them, under them, or right through them. But you need to be relentless in everything that you do. And I said, yes, sir. Absolutely. I get it. And he goes, no, I'm serious. And I said, listen to me. As soon as I get out of the academy, I'll pay you back. I'll work. As soon as I get the job, I'll pay you back. He goes, no, because you don't get it. What I want you to do to pay me back is just every day you wake up and you put that badge on, you make it great. You make it great. And I said, I will. I promise you that. So sure enough, I went to the academy. In here in Texas, we have a part-time academy and a full-time academy. I went to the part-time academy because I had to work full-time still. So I went at night from 6 to 10 at night and did that for almost 10 months and graduated. And when I graduated, he was the person that gave me my first job. It was a small department, and it's not necessarily the department I would want to go to, but there was no way I was going to deny him an opportunity when he gave me the opportunity. So I started there, and from there, I did about 13 months at that agency, and then I moved to the agency that I did the rest of my time at. And while I was over there um, at that agency, the I got a phone call about 7:15 in the morning, about 2 years into the job. I'd only been with Rosenberg, the agency I ended up going to, I think for probably about a year and a half. And it was the dispatch from the agency I'd started with where he worked. And she calls and says, "Hey, you need to get to the hospital." I said, "What happened?" She goes, "Well, Hal was working a was on a traffic stop and ultimately got hit by a car and was pinned under a car and they lifelined him." And so sure enough, I head to the hospital, get downtown at the medical center here in Houston. And and I witnessed something that I thought was just amazing. When I walked into the hospital, wall to wall was seemed like hundreds of cops. And they're all wearing different uniforms, different patches, different badges from different departments. And immediately I looked in there and I felt a true sense of family, of the idea that they don't even know this man, but he was a brother. And so what was weird is I had this overwhelming sense of like this kind of a pride that I was a part of this. And for whatever reason, Hal wasn't even the focus at that. It was almost a selfish feeling, but Hal wasn't the focus at the moment. It was almost like this, wait a minute, I'm a part of this. And so, of course, move forward with it, talk with the agency and my old chief. And he's like, yeah, he's in bad shape. He's in surgery and those types of things. So from there, he spends a few months in the hospital and I would go visit him. And then he gets released. And upon his release, of course, he was still essentially non-mobile and that type of thing. So he ended up having to medically retire from law enforcement. And and I'd go visit him at his house as well. And a lot of times I'd just go in there and be like, "Hey, how do you like your hamburgers?" And I'd go make hamburgers and those types of things. And about 3 months after he got released, he ended up having a heart attack and ended up dying. And so, of course, the guy that got me into law enforcement, and they gave him full honors and those types of things, and in the idea of the ceremony. And so, from that understanding, that was the very first police funeral that I've ever been to. Was the guy that got me into law enforcement and was essentially a father figure. Um, and what's interesting about that is, even to this day, and this kind of answers even some of the other things that you may be asking me, but I always reverted it back to the understanding of that simple 20-second conversation of make it great and the promise I made to pay him back. So, with that understanding, um, in many ways, I wish I would have just paid him the $2,600 back because now I'm kind of in this indebtedness to make sure that I live up to that honor. So, from there, every single day I went to work, I did as I took what my mom showed me as far as work ethic goes, and you know, just putting your all into it every single day. If you're going to be there for 8 hours a day, you spend every second of that day making it great and beyond. So ultimately, that's kind of how I got into law enforcement, and of course, I had a great career in law enforcement. I was able to do just about everything that I would want to do as a police officer, from undercover to training, FTO to CID, I was a sergeant. I was lieutenant. I commanded every division in my department. My department wasn't a big department. It was about 85-man department. I literally had an awesome career.
Wow. Well, that is one hell of an origin story. It reminds me, there's certainly shades of gray there of the Bill Swank and Anthony Johnson story, which in some ways mirrors yours in terms of an existing police officer planting the seed, and as Anthony describes it, watering it time and time again.
Yeah, and I'll tell you about Anthony. That's the reason why Anthony and I clicked so well together. The first time I met Anthony was in Washington D.C. at Police Week, and I will tell you that he asked me the same question. I started going through this, and it was almost like a mirror of understanding. And I will tell you, there's so many awesome cops in this world that I've been able to meet that have very similar stories. And people underestimate the idea and the power that police officers have, and influence that they have over other people, and they may not even realize it. In fact, I teach all over the nation. I teach community policing all over the nation. I teach leadership all over the nation. And one of the things that I tell them is guys, if you got into this business to change the world's way too big to change. What you need to understand is the world that you can change is the world that we live, the world that we influence. Those types of things are so meaningful that we don't even know the impact that we're doing within our world. And if we understand that we can change the world, if we start looking at where our world is, then each and every person that wears a badge can absolutely and ultimately change the world. And I'm living proof of that. If he would have never stepped to knock on that door to initiate a conversation, I honestly, God, I have no idea where I'd be at today.
Was he the officer that you had some contact with when you referenced getting into trouble when you were 16? Was that the same officer, or he was completely different?
He was with the same agency, but not the same officer. But
how did he know that you were in this house, or what was his what planted the seed with him that I need to go check on this? I need to go make contact with this guy.
So growing up, of course, he lived down the road from us, and we didn't really know him, but he was the type of person that would stop and, say, of course, growing up is a little bit different growing up today than it is back then. We would play street football all day and play street baseball all day. And when cars would come by, we'd yell out car, we'd move to the side and be like, okay, hurry up so we can get back to playing our game. And so when he would come by, whether it be in a patrol car or in his POV, now he'd just kind of stop and be like, either wave to us or even get out and tell us to throw a ball or whatever the case is. And it would be small little interactions, but not anything that he would spend much more time than that. And to answer your question, I'm not sure, because that's kind of like the greatest secret. I've asked my mother if she talked to him, and she says that she didn't. And I don't know if he talked to one of my brothers or whatever the case was, but he knew enough to at least ask the question and make the inference that he knew. So, and I am a faithful person, so I think there's some aspect that, there was intervention there. But I honestly don't know the answer to that.
Well, it does, my experience, it does speak to a broader sort of network of police professionals. Almost everyone I know who is in or in any way associated with law enforcement is really trying to do the right things for the right reasons, to have an impact, to change the world as you described it, even if it's a small segment of the world that they can touch. And so many police officers are leaving behind that breadcrumb trails of human interactions, right? And it's these exact kind of stories that almost never get told in, say, mainstream media, but have such an outsized impact on individuals like you and obviously serve them. So I'm really happy that you were able to help tell that story, probably again here on our podcast. It's absolutely starting experience, and obviously one that I hope that police officers all across the country continue to replicate, really have an impact. And hell, you and I both know we need police officers now more than ever. We need people to be interested in the career field. So, and I know you paid it forward many times over since then. And even if you had, I'm sure, even if you had paid Hal the $2,600, you still would have gone to work every single day with such a intense drive. That's the other thing that I find so common across police professionals. Everyone I know who wears that badge recognizes the power, the authority, and really the responsibility that you have when you put on that badge to represent your community, to represent your department, to represent your peers, to represent the men and women who wore the badge before you, bring your best self to work and have that lasting impact. So I suspect even if you paid off the $2,600, you still feel this such a strong responsibility. Pay it forward what Hal started. So, so you spent a number of years in law enforcement. What was it? How long did you serve? And then what was it that you retired or exited? What was that departure from law?
So I started law enforcement. I got out of the academy in '98, in May of '98, and started at 21. And again, you already know the front story of it. But when I went to Rosenberg, I started as a patrolman, and I did about 3 years additional on patrols from the agency I'd started with. And during that time, I was an FTO. I got on our SWAT team. Enjoyed all of it. Enjoyed patrol dramatically. I mean, anybody that doesn't enjoy patrol, they've just been in the job too long. But if you've started this job and you're over here like some of these guys, and I still teach at the police academy because I enjoyed teaching at the police academy, I try to explain to them, enjoy your time on patrol. A lot of times people try to rush it, and I want to be a sergeant. I want to be. Don't enjoy your time on patrol. You have plenty of time. You've got plenty of years to do those things. So ultimately, I'd started from there. I went to CID, and I was general case detective at the time, and then I moved to different divisions or units within CID, and I loved all of them, with the exception of I hated working DV. I don't know why, because it was just a frustration. But I worked every aspect in CID, and I enjoyed my time in CID. And then from there, I went to from criminal investigations. I went to a HIDA task force, and I was an undercover detective for a task force office, which is HIDA, high intensity drug trafficking organizations, and those types of things. And I did about 3.5 years with HIDA. And then I got promoted to sergeant, and then I became a sergeant over the narcotics task force at my home agency as well. And so I did about 2 years as a sergeant as well. And from there, I ended up being promoted to lieutenant, and I took over as the patrol commander. In my department, a lieutenant is a command position. We didn't have captains. And so I took over as a patrol commander. And one of the things that I wanted to make sure is that I served the people under my command better than I could ever, essentially better than I'd ever seen anybody else serve their people. And to me, that's a big deal. I think that's a lost skill and art in law enforcement sometimes. And I think people tend to believe once they put bar, stars, and stripes on that it's their kind of anointment into dictatorship sometimes. And in all reality, I think when you decide that you're going to be somebody's leader, that you make them the most important part of this entire organization as far as the people under your command. And so you serve them, and you provide them every tool that they can possibly have to succeed beyond what you could have ever succeeded. And so with that being said, I took it very seriously. And again, I'm a high school dropout, but because I said, you know what, I want to make sure that I'm doing the best I possibly can and make it great. I went back and I got my bachelor's degree, and immediately got my master's degree, and then also went to Leadership Command College here at Law Enforcement Management Institute of Texas, and just try to educate myself as much as possible and try to get as much mentorship as possible, and enjoyed every minute of it. I really did. And in fact, like I said, I was a commander over patrol, but anytime that there was a interim position that needed to be done in the department, whether it be I was interim lieutenant over administration, which handled the dispatch centers and those type of things. And then I was also interim lieutenant over CID for 9 months, while still doing my responsibilities of a patrol commander, and never complained about it one time. I enjoyed the challenge. I enjoyed every aspect of law enforcement. But in a nutshell, that's my career, and I can tell you how it ended. So I had a great chief, an awesome chief, and he was a chief that uh, if he trusted you, he would empower you to do the things that you needed to do in order to make the department progress and move and be stronger. He wasn't a micromanager by any means, unless you needed to be micromanaged. And I do feel that there's people that need to be micromanaged sometimes. But he never did that with me. He had serious trust in what we were accomplishing and what I was able to work with my team to accomplish. And however, there was an assistant chief that wasn't so the same. And so when my chief retired, it was one of those deals where, and I had no true interest of becoming the chief for selfish reasons at all. I loved what I was doing at the moment, and but I knew that if I didn't, new leadership would come in with the AC, and it was not a good position to be in. So I ran for police chief, and we went through the assessment process, and there was 3 outside candidates that ran for it as well. And they came down to the assistant chief and I. And long story short, he won by a very slim margin from the council final vote. And the very next day, he calls me in and says, "Hey, I don't need people. I don't need people in this department loyal to one person. I need them loyal to the department." And my response to that was, "Then you don't get leadership, because people do not and will not be loyal to a name on the side of the wall or the patch. They'll be loyal to the person that they respect." And so from that point, politics kicked in, and 3 months later, I was terminated.
Mm. What a loss to your agency. I just can't even contemplate letting go of an Aaron Slater. It just boggles my mind. Well, that certainly was not the end of your continuing superhero story. You leave the police department and you have an idea, which ultimately leads to one of the most amazing businesses that I'm aware of. So tell me about that.
So when I left the agency, I still reserved, so I still kept my commission. But and my wife's a cop as well, and she was a cop with the same agency. And so when I left the agency, it was one of those moments where I was very, I wouldn't say heartbroken, but it was very discouraging to want to be a part of law enforcement from that point forward. And the reason why I say that is because I still loved it. I still loved everything about it. But what I didn't love was the idea of working everything that I described, working every second of the day beyond what you're supposed to work, way beyond what you're supposed to work, and dedicating everything you have and beyond that, missing family. I mean, it was my life. It consumed me. And then to sit there and build something for somebody else and realize that they can take it from you in a heartbeat. I said, literally at that moment, I said, well, I am going to build something that nobody can take away unless I fail. So ultimately, when I was at the agency, I had started a social media program, which again was not, in that time, was not favored by the rest of the admin. And but my chief said, you know what? I think you can make something out of this and do it. So I started the Facebook page for Rosenberg, and it blew up because one of the things that I said was, is we looked at all of the other agencies that were doing social media, and they were doing social media very sterile, very, and what I call the funeral pics, where the officers are standing there next to the flag and they're in their class A's. And I said, I don't want that. And they weren't grinning. They were just kind of this sterile look on their face. And I said, no, I want candid photos. I want every officer to never put an officer on our Facebook page unless they're smiling, unless they're happy, unless they're, having fun, and don't have them looking at the camera, have them candid, get them when they're not even noticing. I said, because every single traffic stop and every interaction is what they're seeing those other agencies do. And then we would have fun with it, and we would do jokes and those types of things, and just kind of humanize the understanding of what law enforcement should be. And it blew up. I mean, we became the most followed police agency in the United States of America. I did interviews for People Magazine, Time Magazine. We were on Good Morning America. I was all over the news. We were being interviewed, and then what's interesting about that is the first 6 months I was getting calls from all these other agencies, and it would literally be saying, "I can't believe you're doing this. This is, disgraceful to law enforcement," that type of thing. And I said, "Okay, first of all, where do you work at?" And they would tell me, and I said, "Well, then you don't work here. I don't care. This is my world, and this is what we're doing. So if you don't like it, then keep doing what you're doing at your world." And so about 6 months later, after it started working and people started seeing it, those phone calls completely changed. And now they're asking, how do you do it? Okay. And I would spend hours on the phone working with them and giving them advice and doing all this other stuff. And one of the things I believe that we need to do a better job at in law enforcement is run it like a business and understand that our business, the profits of our business is the relationships that we make with our citizens. And if we're not doing that, and we think that somehow, some way, the citizens are just going to be loving us for the fact that we wear a badge and a uniform, it's not going to happen. And so we need to put the effort in. We need to do those things. And so when I left law enforcement, and I knew that there was this demand for people wanting to know how to do this better, I started a training company called ACE, Assessment Centers and Evolutionary Development. So I was doing assessment centers already for agencies, and still do them today. And so I said I had this grand hope and grand dream of doing a training company ultimately. And so I started teaching a cop. It was called COPS. It was a program I put together. It's called Community Oriented Policing through social media. So ultimately, I was doing some of that. Trying to get it kicked off and trying to get it going was a little bit difficult because anybody that's ever tried to start a business, I started with absolutely $0, no money, because I didn't have any. And but I had the reputation, I had the social media following, those types of things that I was playing off of that I had created at Rosenberg, and I'd started all these different Facebook pages, about 27 different pages, whether it be a canine page, all these different niches within law enforcement, because I wanted to be a broker of instructors and be able to market to each one of those in the niches that they're in. And so I was putting on about one class every month and a half, and it would bring in about $6,000-7,000 in each class. But I wasn't making any money because it would take money to market it, and it would take money to, to get that going. Danny, my wife, and she went to another agency as well, and I had gotten 2 offers in 6 months. One was an assistant chief job, and one was a chief job, and smaller agencies and those types of things. But I had turned them both down, and Danny, my wife, had known about it. And I'll tell you, on January 10th, a bill comes in. It was my tax bill for my property tax. And she comes in with it. She checked the mail, and she comes in with it, and she says, "Hey, did you know about this?" And of course I did, because I know everything at the house. And but I didn't tell her about it. And I said, "Yeah," and it was due at the end of the month. And we owed $6,566 on property tax. And I said, "I know." And she goes, "We have no money." In fact, we were using credit cards to pay groceries and stuff at this point. And so she goes, "Why don't you just go back to law enforcement? That's what you were great at. That's what you loved, and those types of things." And I said, "You gotta understand something. I feel there's something bigger here. I feel that there's something more important here I'm supposed to be doing." But I also felt the pinch. I also felt the understanding that it's not working, and no matter how hard I'm trying, no matter how much I'm struggling, I'm not getting over the obstacle, as Hal would say. Okay, so I literally that night, of course, Danny and I are arguing, and it's impossible to argue about finances because there is no winner in that. It just keeps happening. Okay. I sat and I literally just prayed to God. I said, God, if I give up, if you want me to continue doing this training thing and trying to change the things that I can change in the world that I can influence, then I'll keep doing that. Okay. But if it's not, then send me down another path and show me where you want me to go back to law enforcement. I'll go back to law enforcement because I wasn't paying the bills. I have a family to take care of. And so, sure enough, that next morning, I get up. We're still arguing in a sense that we're just not talking to each other. And so I go to my office. I put my headphones on. I'm listening to music. And I learned how to do graphic art because I wanted to build my own content without having to pay an artist and do my own marketing and those types of things. So I learned how to do graphic art all through YouTube University and watching other people how to show you how to do it. And I learned it that way. And I started designing this design. I had no idea why I was designing. I just wanted to get my head cleared. And so I designed this design, and it was the first design that I ever made. And it was a Spartan helmet with a blue line going through it and separated by the U.S. flag. And I said, that's pretty cool. And it took me about 5-6 hours to design this thing. And today I could do it in no time, but it was just one of those things where I was like, had no idea, just kind of flowed with it. And I said, I don't know what I could do with this. So what did I do? I there's nothing I could use for the training company on it, but I knew I had all these social media pages. So I put it up on a company called Teespring, which is like a fulfillment company for t-shirts. And I put it up on Teespring and I shared it on all the different social media pages that I had. And my wife and I, we had a dinner to go to that night for a friend's birthday, and I put it up, and she's rushed me, and I'm like, okay, I'm almost done. So I put it all up and launch it. We go to the dinner. We spend about 2.5 hours at the dinner, and I come back, and I'm like, I wonder if I sold any T-shirts. So I come and check it, and sure enough, in that time period, I'd already sold over 200 T-shirts, and I'm like, oh my God! So I'm in a panic mode now. Like, did I put the price right? Did I do everything right? And sure enough, all the comments, just bought one, awesome, all this other stuff. And so I kept pushing it. I kept pushing it on the social media pages. And you run the campaign for 7 days. That's how they always work in those type of companies. So you run it for 7 days. At the end of the 7 days, I go to the bathroom where Danny was at, and she was curling her hair. And I said, hey, we got the money for the taxes. And I just saw her like kind of freeze for a second. And she turns and looks at me in this really judgmental look on her face. And she goes, what are you doing? And she met me when I was in narcotics. So I was an undercover narcotic officer at the time. So, and there's not really any secrets between her and I. And she also knows, that I got in trouble as a kid. So I think immediately she flipped to the idea that maybe I went rogue and went back in time. And I said, no, let me show you. I'm selling T-shirts. And she was like, what? So I show her, I take her in there, and I'm showing her, look, I'm sold these T-shirts, and I explain everything. And then, and she was a detective at the time, and her first question was, is this a pyramid scheme? I'm like, no, this is legitimate. How are you a detective? You don't understand what this is. And so anyways, I had made $6,568 in 7 days, $2 more than I needed to. And to me, instantly, it was an understanding. It was an understanding that, look, I know you don't understand this. I know you don't understand why I'm sending you to do this. I know you don't understand this T-shirt world or their apparel world. But ultimately, I'm going to provide. And I'm even going to give you a little bit more than you need, but do something great with this. So I continued to do it. I continued to do it. And I did that for about 3 months. In 3 months' time, I was blessed, and I saved up almost $300,000, and I started the brand of ReLEntless Defender, and just kind of launched with it, and rented out a 1,600 square foot facility from my house. Then I went to a business park and rented that out, and I had no employees. And in fact, Danny was even asking me, "Why are you renting out a place?" I said, because I want to leave the office or leave the house and go to somewhere and actually work and focus on this, because if I'm at the house, I can't focus. And I want to legitimize what I'm trying to do here. And again, everybody thought I was crazy, but I had a plan and I had a direction and I had a path. And so I hired my very first employee, which was a guy that he was in the Explore program and that type of stuff with the PD, and he was my very first employee. And I shut down Teespring and I opened up ReLEntless Defender through an e-commerce site. And I remember the day that him and I were just kind of watching the computer, like, when's the first shirt going to come in? And sure enough, it came in, and we high-fived and we got to work, and it started booming. And from there, I hired Danny. She quit law enforcement full time and came over, and she came to work. And from that point, it just kind of grew and grew and grew. I still teach all over the nation, my classes, uh, because ultimately, I think that that's an important aspect. And in fact, I'm going to start doing that even more so now, which people are like, well, why? If anybody ever asks the question of why do you teach, they don't understand what teaching really is about. So I enjoy that. I enjoyed teaching at the academy. But long story short, that's kind of how everything got started with ReLEntless Defender.
Wow. It's such an amazing story. And, it just speaks to your resilience and your, your drive to continue to find avenues to have an impact. And, just absolutely amazing. I had the really grateful opportunity to come down and see your shop and see your crew just a couple of months ago at one of your ReLEntless Defender galas. And there's something special in the air inside your shop, inside your team there. It's something even more than I might describe as a family. And hopefully I'm not stealing your word here, but I'm curious, what is the word you might use to describe sort of the culture of the organization, which you have built from the ground up and continue to operate today?
In one word, it's hard to describe it in one word, because I've got an awesome team, extremely awesome team. I mean, just literally a dream team. But if I was to describe each and every person here, it's selfless. They come to work every single day, impressing their peers, being selfless with each other, and making sure that they're selfless with the customers. They're selfless with every aspect. And I will tell you that that's hard to find in business these days. Where everybody's chasing a dollar, everybody's trying to chase the next biggest thing and the next movement, and the relationships mean nothing. But these guys, they're some of the most selfless people that I could ever work with, and so I'm honestly proud to lead this organization with that type of mentality.
Well, I'm incredibly envious of the culture you have created and continue to sort of foster there. I'm always looking to steal the best ideas from other leaders, as a my own right. And when I got down to Texas, I was really in tune with, what is this ReLEntless Defender organization? What is Slater doing perhaps differently than I might do? How is he connecting with his employees, who he probably sees as something more than employees? Like, really, they are an extension of his. And from the first interaction, I was honestly, completely blown away with the level of dedication of one of your employees. I mean, I know you've heard and have likely experienced the adage that in any organization, 80% of the people are doing 20% of the work, and 20% of the people are doing 80% of the work. Every single employee I met and talked with was so enthusiastic about ReLEntless Defender, about the organization, about the apparel, about the mission of the organization. All of them had smiles on their faces. There was no internal cancer eating away. There was no one complaining about, oh, I have to work long hours, or Slater's a bad boss. There was none of that. So whatever the secret sauce you and Danny have developed there at ReLEntless Defender, it shows through in every interaction with the team built there. And it's absolutely clear to me, even from the briefest of interactions, that for them, your team, your family, that's not a job to them. That's something way more than a job. That is a continuation of some part of their life story, right? Much like you doing this department or having an impact. I think each of them really recognize that they are, but perhaps to some small degree, they also are having an impact. Not quite the same as perhaps wearing a badge and a gun and going out to the community, but they're part of an organization which is having an impact even beyond just selling apparel. And that leads me right into my next question. So you're a father, you're a husband, you're a retired police officer, you have started this business, you've got 15 plates all spinning in the air, which are all trying to keep afloat, building this team, managing the team, thinking of new designs, and how can you grow your own business? And on top of that, you decide, hey, I'm going to take part of the revenues that I have otherwise been making, and I'm going to create a 501c3. I'm going to create a nonprofit and find another way to give back to the broader community and perhaps to the broader law enforcement. Tell me about that. What inspires you to take the next step to even add more to your plate?
From the beginning, it was basically the foundation that even started this entire thing. From every story that I just got through telling you, as far as what obstacles I've been through, and the things that cemented what my character is based on the environment and the challenges and the people that have influenced me, was to do it even broader. There's so much that I owe the community of law enforcement, and the relationships that I've built, and that the pain that I've seen other people go through. It was very clear to me when a challenge was answered in my selfish needs, and that was paying that one bill. And when it was answered to almost an exact amount, I don't think that there was a question of what I was supposed to be doing. I had no idea anything about the apparel business or t-shirt business. I was a cop that worked undercover. I didn't know anything about t-shirts, but I did know how to make relationships, and I did know what my passion was, and I did know what the selfless service meant. So, with all that being said, yes, we grew and we became very successful, and we continue to be successful. But again, it's that selfless attitude that my entire team has that says, okay, what else can we do to give back? What else can we do to get involved? Even on a grander scheme of more than what we were already donating to other nonprofits. So we started the ReLEntless Defender Foundation. And with that, we do a ton of work. So what we do with our mission is we try to fill voids in areas that a lot of great nonprofits don't fill, as well as some others. And I'll give mention to, and I'll first give mention to Concerns Police Survivors. That's one of the charities that we work very heavily with, and not only the national chapter but all of the local chapters. And I don't think there's anybody in the entire world that does a better job in the healing process than Concerns Police Survivors does for the survivors, the families, and those types of things. And that's a huge need and demand for the things that they set out for and to accomplish in their mission. And then, of course, the National Law Enforcement Memorial Fund. The National Law Enforcement Memorial Fund, there's nobody in the entire planet that honors police officers memories and their sacrifices better than the National Law Enforcement Memorial Fund. Through the wall, through the museum, even through the other initiatives that National Law Enforcement Memorial Fund is involved with, there is no better organization. They can try, but I can tell you, they'll never get there. It's by nature of the understanding in the organization. And honestly, Bill, you've done a great job in the leadership that you provided for the National Law Enforcement Memorial Fund. You've done a lot of bragging on me, and it's time for me to brag on you for a second. As a CEO, you have a challenge. It's not easy raising money, raising funds, when in an organization the size of National Law Enforcement Memorial Fund, and then the burden that National Law Enforcement Memorial Fund has to continue, especially if it's 100% off of donations. And it's a very difficult task. And it's even more difficult sometimes to do that with a team in Washington, D.C., because it's not easy to live in Washington, D.C., and it's not very easy to find good employees to work in Washington D.C. because there's a cost of living aspect. There's challenges there, but you've done it, and I will tell you that same aspect that you bragged on me about, that you have done the exact same. There's not employees, and I talk to the employees all the time. Um, they love you, and I can tell you that one of the things that I've always said about leadership is uh, a manager is a person that gets feared. A leader is somebody that fears to disappoint. So ultimately, the people that work under the National Law Enforcement Moral Fund and the staffing, they fear to disappoint you. So that means you've done a great job in everything that you've done to mold, to praise, to love on them, and those types of things in order to get them to do the things that needs to be done in order for the National Law Enforcement Moral Fund to continue to thrive. Now, what I did with ReLEntless Defender Foundation is I knew that there was a void in some of the other things that some organizations weren't doing such a great job, or was a need for more so. And so I said, well, what mission can we do that is kind of a needed mission that there's a demand for? And so part of it was I started a scholarship program, and mainly because of what I went through and the foundation that was established for me. In fact, the very first employee that I ever hired was the very first person that I ever paid and paid it back. And I paid for his way to go through the police academy. And now he's a police officer, still a police officer to today. And in fact, he was my very first employee. And he's been a police officer now for 9 years. Every one of those 9 years that he left me a long time ago. He only worked for me for a year and then became a cop. And every single one of those 9 years, he has come with me to Police Week every single year. And yeah, I pay him nothing to do that. He volunteers to do that, and that kind of tells you what kind of relationship and the selflessness that I surround myself with. And I think the scholarship program is huge in order to provide law enforcement with otherwise police officers that would be a great police officer, but just in the same boat that I was in, and I just didn't think it was accessible. But our main mission is to ultimately help police officers and their families in what we call chaotic, life-changing situations. So we've helped police officers that either them or even a child of them has come down with cancer or terminal type diseases and those types of things. We help police officers even in the idea of a hurricane or a tornado, and they've lost everything. And so we'll come in and we'll help out, even whether it be paying their deductibles or whatever the case. We're not a big organization by any means. So we find those things that are the hurt points that people don't expect. And so it kind of opens up to be able to help with those types of things because there is a need. There's a major need. I mean, there's organizations out there that do a great job in suicide prevention and PTSD and those types of things. That's not really us, and I can tell you who those people are. But there's an answer there. But we really do focus on that area that people really forget and don't really do a lot of focusing on. Since that time, we've also adopted the organization Humanizing the Badge, which was founded or co-founded by Mike Edwards. And so about 2 years ago, his organization contacted me, and we've been friends for a very long time. Since his inception, Humanizing the Badge started almost the same time that ReLEntless Defender started as a brand, just about 9 months afterwards. And they created the nonprofit of Humanizing the Badge, and it fit perfectly within our realm of what we were doing and what I believe in, and that's building bridges between law enforcement and the community. So we adopted Humanizing the Badge under our wing, and now still Humanizing the Badge, but rebranded under ReLEntless Defender Foundation as Project Humanize, and so we're working to revamp that and get that going again. And ultimately, the mission on that is to go around helping agencies to what I was doing in the past and kind of teach them and give them the skill sets and the knowledge and the power to do this, because you can have programs all day long in your police agencies. Programs do not have any retention. Okay. Programs are just that. And most programs are done based on numbers. So they say, okay, well, let's meet our numbers in order to satisfy a program. When in all reality, what people don't get is some of the best police work ever made and ever done, and the time spent has nothing to do with tickets or numbers or arrests. They have to do with the time that you're spending that nobody notices, that nobody sees, the time that you stop the car, and instead of a kid kicking a can down the road in a low income housing area, you replace that can with a ball and spend 5 minutes with that kid, and you give him another option. You give him something that his parents and the entire environment that he lives in has said that police officers are bad. And you gave that kid an alternative viewpoint that may change his life. So the humanizing the badge aspect is trying to do that, just that, and instill something in police departments and police officers that is lasting beyond the class or the one event that you did for an agency. Because once that event is over, let's talk. For an example, National Night Out. National Night Out is a facade. Okay, it's a facade. People go out there, that they shake hands, they do all this kiss and baby type stuff, but then when the night's over, it's back to business. And most police officers are like, oh, we got this National Night Out thing again. Instead of embracing that understanding of things and saying, no, you know what? Every night is a National Night Out. Every night we need to understand that we're going out there every single day, and that we need to coddle the sheep, that we need to make relationships with the sheep. We need to make relationships with the innocents of our communities and make profits, meaning the relationships. Each person that build a relationship with it is a profit margin. And with that being said, I'm also a believer that when the wolf comes to feed, that we make it the most unattractive world that they could ever imagine. And they need to understand that this is not the place to feed. You know why? Because it's not just the law enforcement that is protecting the community, but we've empowered the entire community to protect themselves and work with us. And what happens is the wolf won't stop feeding, but he'll go feed somewhere else that is less likely to get him caught. So, with all that being said, the foundation, the needs and the demand for it is very high. But like anything else, it's not easy. Running a nonprofit is way harder than running a business. I will tell you that, as you very well know. Um, and but I will also say this: it makes it a whole lot easier when your mission is proven, when your mission is working, and the people that stand behind it can see that. And we do, and you witnessed that coming down to Houston in September and watching and being a part of our gala and everything. And I know I felt it, but and I'll speak for what I see is the people that go to it. It's almost like immediately like this room of love, this room of passion and care and concern for each other, not just the mission, but each other. It's almost like you walk in and you feel like you're at a class reunion of people you've never met before, and it's literally like infectious. And so with all that, it makes it easy with all the things that you just described and all the different plates that I'm trying to juggle and that type of thing. But it makes it so much easier when the people that again are supportive and are involved honestly are energized about it as well. And it works. It works.
Well, I submit to you that it works, and it might be perceived to be easy, at least by you, because of, in large part, because of you and Danny. You know, the energy you bring, the leadership you bring. You talked before about people being loyal to a leader. And my last question, I was going to talk a little bit about. So you have been and continue to be a longtime supporter of both the Memorial Fund and, of course, concerns of police survivors. But since you have been here as a sort of connected to us, Danny's father died in the line of duty. I wonder, first, would you like to say a few words about your father-in-law, the story? And second, how, if at all, did that change your relationship with or your perspective on being associated with the Memorial Fund and our mission? How did that change, if anything?
And I'll start on Danny's father. Juan Delgado, her father did 43 years in law enforcement, which is, I'm 47 years old. I can only imagine doing 43 years of serving, wearing a badge and a uniform. So again, that tells you a lot about the selflessness that he brought to the table. He raised three awesome kids. All three followed in his footsteps. They all became police officers. All three of them are still police officers, including Danny. She just reserves now and works here full time. But his son, which is Danny's twin brother, and her sister are full time law enforcement, and they've been in police officers since they were able to become police officer. But to describe her dad, and I was able to do the eulogy speech at his funeral, and in summary, I made the statement. I said that he was a legacy with a capital LE, and the meaning when you talk to people around him, and the impact that he made in the 43 years of law enforcement and the people that knew him, everybody has a piece of him somewhere in agencies all around. He trained them, he mentored them, he talked to them. And this is aside from raising three kids that became cops. So ultimately, he was and continues to be and will forever be a legacy in law enforcement because of what he's left in turn of what he did. And of course, he passed away early on during the COVID. He caught COVID about a month and a half after they did the lockdowns and those types of things. And one of the things that law enforcement didn't have the privilege of doing was staying home and trying to be safe. Every cop still had to go out there. This was before the idea of vaccines or protections or anything like that. It was just, you know what? This is part of what your responsibility is of being a police officer. And so he ended up being diagnosed with COVID, and then he went to the hospital, and he remained in the hospital, and it was something that was just the most heartbreaking thing that I've seen, to watch his kids not be able to visit him, and they would sit outside, literally out. They'd have him in the hospital on the first floor, and they would allow them to sit outside in lawn chairs and just spend all day. And most of the time, he didn't even know they were there. And but they made sure they were there every single day. They took turns for an entire year. He went through literal hell for 1 year, and from the day that he was admitted into the hospital, 1 year later, he died on the day. And so ultimately, because of contracting COVID in the line of duty, he was honored with full honors, and of course, along with many other sacrifices that police officers did during that time, he was one of the COVID deaths that has been honored on the wall. And I'll extend that even further to a thank you to you, Bill, because you literally allowed Danny to call her own dad's name out, which was, I mean, to this day, she's like, that was a big deal for her. But I've been a part of National Law Enforcement Moral Fund since almost the inception of my business. And I've always believed in the mission. I've always loved the mission. But I've always seen it from an outside looking in initially. And when I would donate, I would just entrust that the donation was being used for what it needed to be used for. And ultimately it was kind of just a relationship that was continued, but not really from a personal perspective. And then I had the honor of applying and get nominated to be on the board after several years of having that relationship. And I was selected to be on the board. And even then, yes, I saw the board from a personal perspective and the idea of helping manage the direction as a board director. But it just solidified why when Danny's dad passed. And same thing with cops, because cops, and that's the reason why I talk about those two, is because with National Law Enforcement Moral Fund, you guys, uh, people underestimate the idea of honor and honoring. And when you take a wall and um, you take the idea of Police Week and what it means to so many families and so many people, um, and kind of the closure, you can have a funeral. In law enforcement, you can have, just like any other death, you can have a funeral. But I'm not sure that the closure actually comes until they see the name on the wall. And there's so much emotion that comes with that. But there's more so much honor that comes with that. And then when you take 30, 40,000 people in a sea of candles and they're waiting for their name or their loved one's name to be called. And when it's read, that is an extremely important moment. And I'm a believer that time runs so fast in life. It does. And when people sit there and say that time flies, it does. But I also know that we won't remember everything that happens in our lifetime, but we will remember certain events in our lifetime that are impactful. And the reading of the names in Police Week and everything that National Law Enforcement Moral Fund does to honor the police officers and their families, that is an event that no matter what, will never be forgotten by anybody that participates on a personal side and an emotional side. So, with that being said, um, if I didn't love National Law Enforcement Moral Fund before, and if my family didn't, there is definitely a true passion for it since that time, even more so.
Well, Slater, you're a king among men. I'm so appreciative of your time, and I'm really appreciative of you being willing to help tell your story, which is part of the broader story of American law enforcement. And on behalf of everyone who works for and with the Memorial Fund, and I would like to think on behalf of everyone who ever has and might ever will wear a badge, I'm so thankful, and I want to express that thanks to you, Dan, and everyone associated with ReLEntless Defender for your long and continuing support, not just of the Memorial Fund, but certainly of law enforcement in general. So I would love to say to my audience, any part of our mission resonates with you, if any part of supporting law enforcement resonates with you, consider going to ReLEntlessDefender.com. They sell the highest quality apparel with some really unique, impactful designs. And every single item they sell goes to help support law enforcement and those who are supporting law enforcement. So for our audience, please support ReLEntless Defender. They have been and continue to be one of our strongest supporters. Aaron Slater, I am inspired by you. I am inspired by you and Danny. And I'm humbled. I'm really humbled to not just know both of you, but I'm also humbled to know that people like you exist in our world. There are too few Aaron and Danny Slaters in this world. And it's my privilege to have come to know you and call you good friends. So thank you again for everything I've done.
And thank you for everything that you continue to do and your entire team, Bill. So thank you guys.
We hope you found this conversation enlightening and will join us again for another edition of Icons, where we introduce listeners to incredible people working within law enforcement who have had a profound impact on the community. These one-on-one interviews provide insight into their lives and careers so we can better understand their challenges and recognize their bravery, commitment, and sacrifice. Please subscribe to Precinct 444 on your favorite podcasting platform to stay connected and to receive our latest content as soon as it drops. We would love to hear from you. Send in your questions, comments, and feedback to precinct444@NLEOMF.org. You can help us make our content even better. The National Law Enforcement Museum is located at 444 East Street Northwest in Washington, D.C., and is dedicated to telling the story of American law enforcement. We expand and enrich the relationship between law enforcement and the community through educational journeys, immersive exhibitions, and insightful programs. Find us online at lawenforcementmuseum.org and stay tuned for more podcast content from Precinct 444. Until next time, stay safe. We'll see you at the precinct.